Hey everyone. I'm about to post a conversation I had with Lucas Vos. He has a podcast, or is it really a podcast? He does a lot of different things on his YouTube channel. It's in the links. Check it out. We've been having some conversations, and I just really appreciate him. You can tell if you look at his YouTube channel that he's been trying to figure life out in all kinds of ways, in an authentic and really with a good heart and a good spirit. And he just finished his studies on Egypt, and I'm going to link to a video he made about that, which you can look at. We talk about his recent marriage. He has a lovely partner, a woman he's very much in love with. We talk about the pressures of just being a young person alive in the world, and how he sort of got disillusioned with this whole idea of fame and trying to create some kind of image of yourself. And I find that very refreshing, and also very refreshing that he's going to be a teacher. He has all this pressure on him, or not pressure, but opportunity to be a model and all these other kinds of ways he could go in his life. And he's really thinking about it deeply in terms of like what would actually make him happy and be right for his path. So I really appreciate that about him. This is a conversation we had when I was traveling in the States a little while ago. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks for being here, and see you soon. Hi, Lucas. We already said hi, but let's say hi again.
Hello, hello, hello.
We've talked before a few times, and today we just are going to talk again. And about you this time. Last time we talked more about me, but the question that came to mind today when I was thinking about your work, like the stuff you did with your undergraduate about Egyptology, which maybe we'll get into, was René Girard. Do I remember correctly that was kind of an inspiration towards that thesis you did as your undergraduate work?
A little bit. It's what I mentioned to my supervisor, being like, this is one of my interests and inspirations. So do you have a topic that would fit into that a little bit? But
what did you read, or what do you remember what was interesting about René?
Girard?
Yeah.
Well, his theory about memetics and sacrifice, especially sacrifice relating more to Egypt, because I think René Girard, who I don't even know how to describe him, because he's able to talk about difficult topics, but I think originally he wasn't even a philosopher or anything of the sort. I don't know if you know what his academic title was exactly.
I haven't
Maybe
looked
he
it
taught.
up. I mean, it just came to me. I mean, I obviously I didn't even say his name right. Girard. Sorry.
I don't know how to say it
I'm
properly.
terrible with French.
Maybe it's
You
French,
speak
so
French, right?
just a little bit. I have to be able to understand it for my parents-in-law. So
is your congratulations, by the way.
thank you. Yeah, my
How long
wife's.
have you been married now?
How long? Let me
Like,
check the date. It's almost been 2 months. So
wow. We'll get into that too. That's the love part.
no, so yeah, a little bit of French. But René Girard, I think he was a literature scholar slash teacher, actually.
Yeah,
But
it was
anyway,
definitely literature that he writes about. I think he was at
yeah.
Stanford, and he's like Greek. I know there's a lot of Greek stuff in there.
Hmm.
And it's very interesting actually, because I hadn't thought much about it, but this beyond dichotomy thing, I need to go read him again. I'm going to say thank you for reminding me of that, because I think it's a lot about combining opposites, isn't it? And about like, I mean, that's why I was bringing it up to you, but I seem to remember him talking about that we imitate each other, and that it's
Yes.
like, yeah, that similarity is the problem rather than dissimilarity. And that's really interesting when you think
Yeah.
about the
And then there's
themes on.
also the mimetic of the opposite, let's say, I think, if I remember correctly. Something like
It's okay if we
anti-mimesis.
get it wrong, but just
Yeah,
like
we're
tell
getting
me
a
what
lot of
comes to
stuff
mind.
wrong. This is a while ago
That's
for
okay.
me.
Everyone, we don't know what we're talking about. We're just
Yeah.
trying. Go look up
No, that's great.
Girard.
No,
But
but I found him to be terribly insightful. I listened mostly to like an audio series he did, which is excellent. I think it may have been with the BBC before he died, but he basically goes through his work in like a couple hours, and that was terribly insightful, especially on sacrifice. I think he's got a very solid theory on it, what role it served, and then he connects that to mimesis. But lest I stumble upon this, unless I stumble over my words in trying to relay this theory, I think I shouldn't go into it too deeply because
No, I think the reason I'm bringing it up with you is I'm trying to understand what you were thinking about that your professors noticed in you that then sort of oriented you towards what you study. Like, do you remember what the themes were? It doesn't have to be like specifically
Yeah,
talking about it, but yeah, where
yeah.
were you? What were you thinking about? What do you care about? Mhm.
So to give a bit of background, the thesis was about Egyptian theology and about specific text which contained hymns to a specific god, and that God was seen in those hymns, in the context of those hymns, as the highest God, and other gods would be manifestations of him. Um, and I think one of the main reasons my supervisor gave that topic to me, or at least he suggested that topic, was because I'm generally interested in gods, where I was at the time for sure, and in reality, and almost therefore theology. I'm trying to, through whatever medium, understand reality, and I found theology to be quite fruitful for that. Um,
Yeah,
so
I'm really
yeah.
interested in that part of your life and your work
Mhm.
too. You said gods, so I mean that's a big theme here, right? The pantheism,
Yeah.
but I mean, yeah, maybe you can talk about that a little, like that topic, or I mean, are you
Hmm.
a pantheist? Or like what?
No, well, yeah, but the term they used was henotheism.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
that is like polytheism, but one god is taken to be higher than the other god. So there's a hierarchy of some sorts with one at the top. So even in the Bible, this view is kind of espoused, where they mention, for example, other gods, and don't quote me on this, but I think they say something to the lines of having to choosing Yahweh over the other gods, let's say. Um, could be getting this wrong, but it's along those lines. That's how first the concept was explained to me by my teacher, who taught me ancient religion in my course. Um, but yeah, so within Egypt, there were times that, in this case, Amun, which was the god that I'm speaking about, was thought to be higher than other gods. And so you're still operating within a polytheistic framework, but he would be the sole ruler in a certain sense. And it's funny because this came shortly after there was something that you could consider monotheism. Some people consider it monotheism, um, way before the religion of the Israelites, where Akhenaten, which was another god, or sorry, I'm saying this wrong, Aten, which was another god, was thought to be the only god and exclusively the only god. So even other gods would be erased from Egyptian tombstones and imagery, let's say. So yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me. I said pantheism, didn't I? Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
it's too early in the morning here, and
No, you're good.
I'm on the other side of the world from you today. So, and I've been traveling, but yes, polytheism. Of course, I'm always thinking about like opposites, what seem like opposites, or many, and how this relates to the idea of one. Or
Mm.
we brought up Girard and this idea of, I think he also has the idea of triangles and something with the mimetic. I'd have to look back at it, but and then in your like Christian or certain kinds of, I'm no expert on this at all, not even
Mm-hmm.
close, but there's definitely like the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. There's
Yeah.
you talk about, I don't think I have the terms right, but like the triad and the
Yeah.
triunity and
Yeah.
yeah. So are all these ways of trying to understand like a plurality of possible gods? I mean, we don't even have to think about what does God, like that word, mean when it's plural or when it's singular. I find this so fascinating, but so hard to talk about. Was this part of why you wanted to get into it too, or do you
Yeah.
have a clearer idea of it than me?
Yeah. So yeah, I think this view is kind of a reflection of my view of reality as well, which is similar to what you were just talking about, of one and many. Um, One of the books that I read for the thesis is called something like that as well. The one and the many, or at least one of the chapters is. And so you've interviewed McGilchrist as well. Um, he opposes the left and the right hemisphere. And then another thinker I like speaks about multiplicity and unity. And then John Vervaeke speaks about well, opponent processing one, and I think he has another dichotomy that is escaping my mind right now. And then you famously have Jordan Peterson speaking about order and chaos, and I think all of these are different frameworks which I think point to um, one, the paradox of reality, because one and many seem to be opposites, but they both represent reality of some sorts. Um, yeah, and two, I think the dichotomy of reality in a sense as well, which is what you're interested in, and then going beyond it, so transcending it in a way. So, so yeah, I think there's actually a lot of points of conversion there. So partially
Yeah,
what pulled me
exactly.
is
I
that.
mean, the whole idea of what I try to talk about in the philosophy and find ways to like what I'm trying to connect the patterns with across all these disciplines is holding the paradox, right? Which doesn't mean that the opposite, like we seem to think of paradox as a problem rather than a portal, you know, but it's
Mm,
actually, I feel like it's more like that's the portal, right? And you hold
yeah,
it. You don't
yeah,
try to make the squish the opposites together, but you also kind of start to realize that there's not just two. I mean, that's a weird way we think too, in the way our language is focused. And I think also these, at least most modern religions, I feel like it's an either or always, this God or no God, or this religion or no religion, or you believe or
mm,
you don't believe. And I'm really interested in, after studying it so much, what, like how you see that too. Because for me, I feel like the practice we need and what I'm trying to figure out a way to approach and show in my philosophy, which is feels very important in a lot of ways, is holding the paradox, right? As
yeah,
a practice that opens up seeing things not in twos, right?
yeah, yeah,
Maybe more in
absolutely.
threes or maybe in complex systems of threes, right? Depending on where your position is. I don't know. How do you see
Yeah.
it?
Well, I think speaking about mystery, which this is some kind of a mystery, the paradox, I don't think mystery is something to solve. I think it's something to attend to hold space for. And so I think ultimate reality is not for us to understand. Maybe it's for us to interact with, and it's for us to be in relationship to. But it's a paradox for a reason. And I think it partially comes from having a scientific worldview that we try to get an answer. I don't think
Mm.
we need an answer, but I think there's a lot of beauty to the dichotomy and transcending it in some way. But that has to go beyond words at some point. So so yeah, that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, in a way, we can't represent what is, and we can't, I mean, all this stuff, whether it's religion or whether it's text, whether it's literature, or whatever it is that we're doing, we're finding ways to represent it and communicate about it with each other, right? With one another. And that's very
Mhm.
important and it's meaningful and real and even true. But what I hear you saying, or at least this would might be my own projection, is all the stuff that we're representing to one another, the real process, which is like continuous and kind of beyond beginning and end, and none of these
Mhm.
categories that we use to describe it and talk about it and come to know it better could ever actually describe it. So we seem to kind of like, how do we understand that we'll never describe it, or it is this mystery in the way you described, just by that's what it is. We're part of it, even we can't even get out of it. But
Yeah.
at the same time, it's really important, isn't it, to try to describe it and to do the science and to do the literature, write the books, like find all these ways to communicate with one another, because somehow that's doing something to with the process of the process. Or what do
Yeah.
you think?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I was listening to talk about Taoism as well, and what you're speaking of reminds me of that, where you have the Tao Te Ching. I don't know if you're familiar,
Yeah,
but
Taoism is important. That's another example of this in a way.
yeah, and they write a lot about the Tao,
Hmm.
but at the same time, they're very aware like this is inexhaustible. Once you
Yeah,
think
there's
you
even that
speak
quote, isn't there? Like the Tao that can be spoken isn't the Tao or something. Yeah.
exactly, and
Yeah.
then there's yeah, it aligns with this idea of I think it was Meister Eckhart or maybe someone else that said that he would pray to God to rid him of God, of the concept of God, because he cannot fully understand it.
Oh, I've never heard that. That's beautiful. I mean, I've read Meister Eckhart, but wow, thanks for that's a good one.
So I'm not sure if
Yeah.
that was my record, but I
Well,
hope so.
whoever will, I'll have to
We'll
again.
find it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's something like that. It's definitely useful to think about this, but not in a way to solve it. Um, but you can always get closer and you can find ways to attend to it. But yeah, you were speaking about different religions and false and correct. One thing I point out in the thesis is that the Egyptians didn't think about gods or even creation myths as false or correct. They thought more on sacred and less sacred. And so I think one of the reasons we apply this false correct dichotomy and paradigm is, again, because this is kind of what we were raised in the last 100 200 years. But I'm trying to find ways to transcend that a little bit, and sometimes you have to let go of all your theories. Sometimes
Mm.
theories can also be good ground to stand on, but you have to remember that the ground that you stand on is not absolute. It always remains a map to the territory. It remains something that is of this world, and I feel cannot fully represent what goes beyond. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Very good way to say it. It reminded me, I think, in a video which I'll link to, where you talk about your thesis. You talk about, I think it's that this worldview was one where multiple stories or multiple paths can be correct, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And even I won't say it correctly, but multiple gods are also one god, or one god are multiple gods. Or there's this wonderful quote, I think it's by Jan Osman, that you talk about like how to it's talking again about the triunity or the
Mm-hmm.
triad. Again, I don't know which term is exactly right, but
Yeah.
you talk about it being like transcendent. It's the way to be. There's a wonderful thing about the plurality of gods that then can be transcended to be something like one, which
Yes.
almost feels like the opposite of how you might think of it as being, but
Yeah.
speaks to what we're trying to do here with holding the paradox, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And that's the fun thing about it as well. It's fun, but it's also, it can be annoying because you can't fully pin it down. But you have to let go of that. And I think you have to approach it more with the right hemisphere, in a sense that you cannot be too precise about it. Um, but yeah, there's a power to both the plurality and the unity. Um, and I was speaking yesterday to someone who is very much interested and involved with Robert Pirsig's work. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Who? Say it again.
Robert Pirsig.
Oh, the motorcycle Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I like his framework as well because he has a metaphysics of quality where he poses that static and dynamic quality is a way in which you can view the world. I guess it's a very useful paradigm, and I found it to be very useful, and it connects with this as well, this multiplicity and this unity, and that you kind of need both in most situations, um, and therefore for reality as well. I think
I
it
absolutely agree. Yeah. And
yeah.
it's funny you bring, I mean, I guess we all, once we have this understanding through reading or something, we start finding similar sources, because I don't think but I also worked in this like ecological motoring, and
Yeah, I
I've
do.
done some, okay, well, I've done some conversations actually relative to that. And I've read that a lot, and thought about it, even just in terms of, I mean, that's a more practical issue, but yeah, how we can understand what movement means in our lives and the way that we create vehicles towards it. But I think to try to bring it to a more practical, like, how does this, because I want to know, you're doing so much studying and you're thinking so much about this, and you're doing it in school, but it feels, now you've graduated,
Hmm.
but it feels like a real life mission you're on,
Yeah.
and when did this, I know we talked a little bit about it together before, but
Hmm.
when did it start, and how does it relate to all these ideas? Like, how has this changed you, right? Is this become a practice for you in a way, or
These ideas.
yeah, and this idea too of being able to think of, for example, I wonder about with God and with religion. I mean, I think that's an important part of your life, right?
Hmm. It is.
And I don't know if you came up in a particular, to go to Girard, like a kind of imitation or a path, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if that fits well with all of this or not, or
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, what does that bring up in
Uh, yeah. Okay. Let me think where to start here. What
you?
is useful? Well, I got interested in like really learning and reading at a later point in life, and I'm very young, so I don't mean like in my 60s, but like when I was 18. So like as a teenager, I was never interested in school. Um, I think partially because you have to read, so you don't your curiosity aspect doesn't get activated so much. Um, so yeah, about when I was finishing high school and when I finally had like some freedom to read what I actually wanted to read, that's when I got turned on to um, a lot of these ideas started with John Vervaeke, and I read a bunch of philosophy as well. My brother has been very helpful with that. He teaches philosophy, and so yeah, that started things, and then slowly, I think I started developing something akin to this worldview of it's a relational worldview. It's a worldview of unity and multiplicity, as you're describing as well, and of holding the paradox. It's a nice way of saying it. And what that translates to in my life is that I try to I try to make my life as reality is, or as nature is. Let's say we're speaking about nature and importance of reconnecting to nature in a sense. I think nature has a very fine balance of unity and multiplicity in a sense. I think there's a real
Mm.
coherence to nature, but there's fantastic diversity to it. Um, and so I think the more I've learned about these ideas, the more I've realized that it's very important to put into practice first. So to stop always talking about it, and
Mm.
and what
Good
putting
point.
that into practice means is, yeah, I think it's to try to become more beautiful, and I think to become more beautiful is to exactly, yeah, to replicate nature of some sorts, and therefore the
Mm.
multiplicity and the unity, the paradox almost. Um,
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah.
whereas that's not, I think, normal nowadays. So if we're really going to analyze a bit how a modern life looks, I think it's quite disconnected from that actually, in many ways. And that was definitely the trajectory I was going on for a while.
Can you say more about that? Because I think that's something I hear. I mean, that's a really important point
Mm,
right now. And it even weirdly relates to Girard, I think, because in terms of where we are now with social media and like this mimetic
mhm.
imitation and what you just described, it doesn't feel like we're trying to reflect or find ourselves or notice ourselves as part of nature in the way you said. It feels more, well, what's it been for you? I'd really like to hear your experience.
Yeah, so I think I was on that path for a while as a teenager. I lost your camera here. I hope you're all good. But
I'm still here. I don't know.
okay, good, good, all
Uh,
good.
well, yeah.
Yeah, I think I was on that path for a while, just as a teenager. I think it was obvious to me that I just wanted to make a lot of money, and yeah, I think it's because I was kind of raised by pop culture in a sense, watching a lot of TV, and I think I never questioned the values of that. So of the TV shows I was watching, the films that I was watching, and yeah, everything that I was interacting with through the internet. I think a lot of kids are online nowadays. And if you just would look at it by who's getting the most views and the most clicks, so who are people really giving their attention to, and therefore imitating often. Um, I mean, they're celebrities, they're athletes, they're pop stars, they're they're often people that are not living a very balanced life. They often have difficult personal lives as well, but they're often rich and they're often famous, so they're getting a lot of eyeballs on them. And yeah, so I never really questioned that path. I was always like, yeah, of course, that's the highest path you could want. But I think what you're doing there, to use a bit more religious language, and I hope that doesn't turn people off too much, it's like you're basically worshiping lower gods, you're worshiping idols, you're worshiping greed, money, and that's not good, you know. So I think at some point I started to realize, I think it was more of a gradual process, that's not the highest path I could take in life, and I think the education helped with it, but also trying to live a more natural life, um, trying to get priorities straight. My wife really helped me become more complete and more balanced for sure. Um, in my wedding, during my wedding, I said that I used to want to be perfect, but that she made me want to be complete and whole. Um, and this perfection is something I think a lot of people are going for nowadays as well. It's this, I think it's a domination of the masculine as well. The masculine wants to be perfect, but the feminine is able to be whole. And so, um, yeah, that's definitely played out in my life, because when I just started getting into these books and into the self-help things, and into this journey of like, I want to make something of my life. The obvious trajectory there was like, I want to become the most successful, or like, you know, become the best at something. But you always sacrifice something if you want to be the best at a particular thing. And so, um, in accordance to nature, I stopped going on that path, um, because anything that grows so quick as to become famous is like a cancer, um, in biological terms. So yeah.
Slow time, take the time. It's, yeah, I think there's so much in there that I care about and that I think about a lot and that I see in, you know, different people in my life, younger people too, that I worry about, but also myself, of just what you just said. Like, we are born into a certain kind of space, and there's already these kind of accepted parameters of what is attractive in terms of what we want to become.
Mm.
And but it's I think we think because things are the way they are, that must be right, that it must be. Yeah, this is very hard to talk about, but hopefully we can try and do it together. Because for example, you look on social media, like you were saying, and you see the people who have the most money or the most followers or whatever, and we think that means they're happy or something, or that they've succeeded in some kind of. All this is stuff we assume. We're not really thinking about it, but we want to somehow be like that, like seen, loved in that way. But we take for granted that that actually means those things, and it actually doesn't always. I mean, how do we readjust, like,
Yeah.
our understanding of. I mean, I feel like what you said about being complete and what we've been trying to talk
Mm-hmm.
about, what I think of as holding the paradox, what many other people that we've already talked about have different phrases for. You kind of, or meditation, or what
Yeah.
religion can give us, you take a step back from all that and you
Yeah.
just look at it and say, you know, there's some. It has to do with the nature and the wholeness
Yeah.
too. I don't know. What do you?
Yeah. No,
It's hard to
absolutely.
talk about, but let's try.
No, no, let's do it. I have two different ways to approach this that I like. One is the being versus the having mode that John Vervaeke has spoken about, which I really like, where the having mode is it's about having more things, or you know, being richer, so having more money, um and hoping that that transforms you. So you see that often with people that go through crises in their lives. They try to change the things that they have, and they buy sports cars or whatever. Um, Whereas it's much more important to focus on the being mode. So how can I be a better husband, a better wife, a better father or daughter, or whatever it may be? How can I become wiser? Um, so that's one of the ways in which you can change your paradigm a little bit in the way you're looking at the situation. And another one that I like is, um, which fits with this, is it's quantity versus quality, where anything you can quantize doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to result in a better life. Like if you have more followers, doesn't mean it's going to be better. If you have more money, doesn't mean it's going to be better. But you can focus on the quality of your life, um, and then you can be content. It's the same with the people that are trying to live now for 230 years by becoming half of a cyborg. And I think a lot of it is just out of existential angst that you're, or not existential angst, but death anxiety, that you're afraid of this to end. But I think it's very important to come to terms with your mortality. And I think it's inescapable. And once you do that, I think you can get the satisfaction and the contentment in life to say, okay, this was good, um, and it's okay that it's gonna finish, and it's natural. So it's going back to nature as well. So yeah, really, what we're trying to do here is to become more natural. I guess I think it's a very high thing to strive for, uh, and not to be reduced. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, it's, I mean, again, we're trying to hold the paradox, because for me, it's not that we have to become natural, but it's almost like a realization that we're more already than
We are,
this
yeah,
body, right?
yeah.
And we are part of it. And how do we notice it and come to know it? Or how do we come to understand that our completeness is actually what you were just describing? It's the being.
Hmm.
The being and the having are the same in a way in this paradox. So when you stop separating like yourself from
Yeah,
nature.
Yeah.
I don't know how to describe that, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah, you're right. No, but you're right. I mean, separation is one of the things that, well, many different religions or schools of thought was described as an illusion in a sense. Um, I'm not sure about that exactly, but it of course depends on how you look at it. But separation definitely is something that it's kind of false on one level of reality when we're talking about unity, for example. In a way, we do have a unity. Um, it's about learning to see the separation for an image, for not a for basically a useful fiction, but um, learning that we're actually, or realizing that we're actually one in a sense, and then you would never hurt yourself, hopefully, so you wouldn't hurt another, and that would hopefully result in a more harmonious existence. That's something to strive for. It's like it's really significant, something to strive for.
it is, and I mean, even these kind of practices can become, how do I say, not static or dichotomous, but it's I'm trying to think of like just in real life, okay? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's wonderful to be in the space where we agree and we can talk about these things, but the way that the patterns are set at the moment, or the way that the paths that we come into, right, work in a certain way, and until we can all have this way of stepping back and realizing, which could happen fast, but to shift those patterns, then one feels like they need to fit in, right? So I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
you've experienced this or how you've dealt with it, but you're a young person, the world is telling you have to decide who you are and create your
Mm-hmm.
story and what are you going to study and where are you going to work, and
Yeah.
you got to make money and how are you going to pay the bills,
Yeah.
and sometimes all of what we're talking about is the way to deal with all that pressure, but it's a lot of pressure, isn't it? And
It is.
it's hard, isn't it, to understand that this can be helpful. I mean, maybe the more of us talk about it and are doing it, the more the patterns start to shift. But has it been hard for you? Because maybe listening to you and looking at you, one might think, oh, well, he just kind of had an epiphany and he's living his life in this way. But
Uh, that's a very good question. Um, I'm very fortunate, first of all. I think I'm well surrounded. I've always had good family around me, um, giving me giving me people that I know will love me no matter what I do. That's, I think, very powerful to have. A very useful, something I can always rely on, and I know that. I'm also lucky in terms of personality. I'm not neurotic at all, so like I don't get very fussed about what other people think. But that also had to do with the certain lessons that I went through in life, because I definitely feel like I was the opposite as a kid or even as a teenager. Um, yeah, I think it was around this time where I was, finishing high school and I had time on my own. This was as Corona started, so having a lot of time there, um, and just basically thinking like I should not let my life be guided by what other people might think of me. Um, that's not to say I won't listen to what people think of me, or that I don't hear my family when they're concerned about me. But if you don't love me, then there's a good chance that what you're saying about me is not to lift me up, but actually to destroy me, or to want to, you know, maybe it's more coming from your own limitations, or maybe it's coming from envy, um, that you're voicing what you think about me, or all these things. So
were people
yeah,
doing this to you at the time? I mean, were there actual people that you felt,
um,
or was it more of this media kind of thing that we've been talking
I
about?
think a
Or
lot of I think a lot of it is like you think people are doing it. So it's your own imagination of what people are saying or thinking about you that are holding you back from changing your life. Sometimes they are actually people, but it doesn't really matter so much. It's more about your own projections and your own thoughts. And I was more interested in stopping those thoughts than stopping those people. For me,
that's
it's fine
interesting.
if people want to do that because it's their own issue. And actually, I would love to help them with that. But it's more about what you construct in your own mind that can be extremely parasitic.
Is
Um,
that connected to what we were talking about in terms of all the movies you'd watched and all this
yeah,
idea you had of what
yeah.
success was supposed to be, and you comparing yourself to that somehow?
Yeah, you're planting patterns in your life, where they're being planted by the the content you consume and the people you surround yourself with,
Mm.
you start to create expectations, of course. So that's why a lot of people advise to change the people you hang out with, for example, or like to change your surroundings. That they're all helpful because your reality around you shapes who you are in a sense, and you have power over that to an extent, but it goes very gradually. So you have to change that step by step. If you want to go into a more beautiful life, you have to clean it up a little bit, step by step, and um and make it more beautiful.
Well, that's
And
kind of a
so,
wonderful realization, isn't it? That, I mean, it seems kind of simple, but you had to have it, right? As you're
yeah,
describing it, just to step back and think, okay, everything I'm reading, everything I'm opening my phone and looking at, all the conversations I'm having, these are patterning my life. And
yeah,
it feels like you don't have agency over that because you don't at first. You're just pushed into it. And,
yeah.
as kids, we don't even have a sense of self yet. And through
Mm-hmm.
language and sociality, we develop the agency to question ourselves, listen to our thoughts, or we're just still stuck with them. Like we
Yeah.
can't separate we don't know that our thoughts are not us, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
a realization to have. And then to have what you just described, to realize, okay, I'm not my thoughts, but also my thoughts are just patterns that are being created by all the stuff I'm consuming. If
Yeah.
I change what I consume, I can change the patterns maybe.
Exactly. And that goes very slowly, but it's really what you say. It's a powerful realization. It's basically shifting your mind in that sense where you can feel really enslaved by what you're doing and the behavior you're engaging in, but you can also see it as, okay, I have some power over this and I can do that step by step. And I feel that especially with habits. I think that's I mean, it's a very cliche and a popular book, but Atomic Habits I really like as a book. It's very simple, but it speaks about the title is fun. It's atomic, so atomic
Mm-hmm.
meaning that it's a small. It can be small as an atom, but it can have a gigantic impact, like an atom bomb. So you can change small little things in your life to make massive changes because everything you do, especially if you do it habitually, compounds over time. And so, yeah, I found it to be an extremely empowering way of thinking, and that started me off on the self-help type of thing.
Oh, was
But
that
then,
one of the first books you read, Atomic Habits?
no, not necessarily, but it's in that
Okay.
sphere.
But
You know,
that
it's
idea in general, yeah.
yeah,
And it
exactly. So
is, I
it's
think it's a very clear way of just like I think about habits all the time because we don't
yeah,
usually think of thoughts as habits, but they are.
they
And
are.
that connects to this whole like body and mind not being dichotomous, but
Hmm.
still being distinct. But we
Yes.
understand with our bodies when we do that we have good habits or bad habits, but we don't understand that our thinking is that way too, and that it's also just as kind of constrained or unconstrained by the conditions in which we put ourselves in terms of
Mhm.
those thought spaces, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you can see how the things you do with your body can shape the way you think. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah,
it,
that gets to the nature because as you've been talking a few times, I've thought of the shorts that you
mhm.
often produce, and they're very natural in a sense of like one can feel a different habit, right?
Yeah.
Through usually visions of nature, whether it's, I don't know, a landscape or some rain, or is that on purpose? Has that been part of your repatterning your habits of emotion and thought?
The shorts that I
The
post?
way you see the world, right? Because
Yeah.
the shorts are just
Yeah.
little
Yeah, yeah,
visions
for
from
sure.
your mindset,
No,
kind of. I
I
mean,
would say so. I think like nature in general, just viewing nature, I think it sets you straight, you know. There's something about it. It's really extremely transformative.
well, being
Uh,
out there and noticing it, right? Just
yeah.
actually not walking through these spaces caught in patterns of thought, but looking at them. I feel like that's what you're doing with the camera. You're like, look, guys, like, look,
Yeah.
girls, look, people, look,
Observe.
everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, it's observing, it's attending, and that's what I'm saying about the mystery as well. And the mystery is all around us, in a sense. So you can attend to it at all times. But I think especially in natural places and in sacred spaces as well, um, it can become present to you more easily. You know, there's people that can meditate on a busy street, you know, but going to nature actually affords that type of mind state much more easily. And so yeah, that's extremely important to me. Actually, I live just next to a forest. I'm looking out on it
Mm.
now and close to a
Oh,
beach. So it's actually very important to me. When I was gonna start studying 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, I didn't care so much where I lived. I just looked on the map wherever there's green. because I just knew that would be an important part of my sanity.
Oh,
Um,
that's great.
yeah,
And probably made a big
yeah,
difference.
yeah, for sure, absolutely.
So how did you, so you, let's say it was your teenage years before you started studying, when you started changing
Hmm.
these habits in a way. And I'm interested in how that brought you your path, because you're kind of changing your path. You're changing this mimetic triangular
Yeah,
thing, and how did that bring you to to love, right? I mean, there's many kinds of love, but if I feel like you've discovered a love that's opening you as a person, that's
yeah.
what you just said, right? That's helped you in the ways you needed. So I'm
Hmm.
wondering how where these paths found one another.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. No, that's a good question. It's really not obvious based on where I was going because I was onto the track of the self-help, and um, I still see a lot of. I see it actually becoming more and more popular nowadays. The waking up at 5 a.m. and the hours of running. That's what I was in for a short time. So what happened was I actually had a very fortunate experience with psychedelics, a specific psychedelic called ayahuasca. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, yeah, that
I've
was
never
quite
done
a
it, but I
gamble.
know. Yeah.
Hmm.
I've never done it, I have to say, but I know it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that was a big gamble for me because I was 18 or 19. No, I was 18 when got really interested in this, where I just heard people transform, and I was at this time still very much stuck in a materialistic view of reality, reductionist view, let's say.
Were you
Um,
already waking up at 5 a.m. and doing all that? Were you
yeah,
okay? So you were in
that's
that kind of a
yeah, I was in
mindset.
that zone, like working in
Do
the
you want to
morning.
unpack that just a minute before? Because you kind of brought it up, and I know what you mean, because we can also turn our attention to becoming obsessed with what we think of as healthy habits, which isn't really
Yeah,
what the answer is either.
yeah, that's where I was at. Absolutely.
Okay, why
So
don't
what
you
happened
unpack
was,
that a minute too?
yeah, absolutely. So I just finished high school and got into self-help, got into reading those books. They were mostly nonfiction, just helping, uh, just trying to become healthier, I guess, and also richer. So I was reading a lot of investment books, and really it was a very materialistic way of being if I look back on it, because it was focused on the biological and the financial in a sense. But yeah, I got inspired by, certain individuals and certain ideas of optimization of health, for example, um, which ironically doesn't take into account so much the social or the spiritual. Um, but yeah, I got inspired to squeeze out every part of my day, becoming as productive as possible. I've always liked a little bit of structure in my life. My mother always told me that I like structure, and so I started just planning out my days, like all of my day.
Every
So
minute,
yeah, yeah, almost on the hour, let's say.
to
So I would
be the
even
most productive and optimal in terms of
exactly
getting
to just
yourself
get
in
the most
shape.
out of
And
it. And that was actually, like, looking back on it, I always tell people that that was actually really good for me, but it had to be temporary. Um,
that's a good point too. That's to this either or. It's not that that was bad, but
yeah, yeah, it serves a function in a moment, so that being imbalanced is not always bad, but it has to be in service of something else. And so I would wake up at 5. I would run. Sometimes I would run half a marathon just on a Wednesday, and I would. Um, I had a job that I worked just in the morning, and I would play piano every day for an hour. Somehow instrumentally, like not even playing piano for playing the piano, but just playing piano to become better. And language learning, and I would read a certain amount of pages every day, and um, there must be other habits that I'm forgetting about, but just yeah,
I
basically
understand.
that
Yeah,
was a
it
phase
was
of
on
my life.
in all aspects trying to improve, right?
Yeah,
Optimize.
and it was good to a degree, but at some point, my brother, who I bless my brother, I love him to death. He would always just try to steal, and not steal, man, to play the devil's advocate a bit with me. To be like, okay, but hey, you haven't spoken to your friends in this time, and like, is this sustainable? This type of path, and yeah, he basically always has helped me get a bit closer to goodness, I think. think that he's always done that, whether consciously or subconsciously, but he's always been a very good influence on me.
Sounds like he also helps you see yourself too, like what we were
Yeah,
talking about, so you don't get
exactly.
swept up in the inertia of whatever and not
Yeah,
take that step back, which we have to do it every day. So we need people to help us. But
yeah. People they can help you reflect, indeed. And I didn't have a lot of people around me, so there wasn't a
yeah,
lot
you
of that
were in your
happening.
world. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that was that phase. And I was also listening to a lot of podcasts at the time, just whatever I would find interesting. It's also started my fascination for history and ancient history. So it's partially where I got interested in Egypt. Um, but yeah, then I heard multiple people who had done certain psychedelics, started reading up on psychedelics. Um, basically, from a materialist frame, psychedelics are transcendence in a sense. So they are when people describe it like the almost the only passageway out of that, especially if you're really deeply entrenched in that, and I was. So whereas I think a lot of people are just more um they're just a bit more open and a bit more in tune with their spirituality, they might not need such a blast of something and such a breaking of the frame as I had. But I feel like I really did need that, or at least it turned out to be extremely fruitful and helpful for me. So I got interested in that, and I did a session just in my country, and
The Netherlands
yeah,
is
that
really
got me
good
to.
for that, isn't it? For
Sorry.
the Netherlands is a good place for being able to do that in
Well, I was
a
actually
safe
still
environment.
illegal. It was still
Yeah.
illegal, but
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
better than other places for sure. Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
in Dutch we have this saying that it's illegaal maar wel gedogen. It means something like it's illegal, but it's kind of condoned, like it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So like they had a public website and everything, so you could just do it. But yeah, I did that, and that basically showed me. It convinced me that there was so much more to reality than I could have ever imagined, and I think it really opened up my view of reality. I think it broke a lot of frames, a lot of, those, when I spoke about the ground that we stand on, that's actually useful fiction. It kind of blasted away that. And then it leaves you with this blank slate almost. And that's why there's a negative potential there as well.
Mm-hmm.
People get into
Mm-hmm.
cults. There's
Because
danger
I
to
guess it
that
could
as
be
well.
scary, right? If you don't know, then you don't know what to hold on to if the patterns have suddenly opened like that.
Exactly. Exactly. So you come out of it with, at least I did, with an overwhelming feeling of love, but also a certain sense of confusion. Like I couldn't speak for
Mm-hmm.
2 hours after it, and I
Oh
couldn't believe
gosh.
that the apple that I was holding in my hand was real, and and things like that. But I was extremely opened up to, for example, my religious upbringing. I had much more sympathy for it when I came out of it. My parents, they picked me up, they prayed for me before, and
Oh, that's very
it's very
important.
sweet.
You have
Yeah,
family to support you because a lot of people feel like they
yeah,
have to hide it from everyone they know and
yeah. No, they
or
didn't. They actually,
family wide.
they were very, very supportive, but also very worried.
Yeah,
Uh,
of course. Of course.
but yeah, I was at past 18, so they had to.
Right. Why did you choose ayahuasca, can I ask? Because you could have done something like some kind of mushroom or I mean that is legal in the Netherlands and
Yeah, that just ayahuasca seemed just like the most intense possible thing that I don't think anyone does it coming back like, oh yeah, it was okay. Like almost everyone comes out of it with like a complete transformation, and that's what I was looking for at the time.
right.
Um,
Makes
so
sense.
I've always been a kind of 0 or 100 type of person.
Yeah. I was about to say it fits with the way you were doing
Yeah,
the habits beforehand and so on.
exactly.
So mm,
And I still am
makes
that to a certain degree, but I try to
mm,
minimize
well,
that a bit.
it's
But
good to
yeah,
just
so
know it's part of you and embrace it and channel it the right way, I
yeah, you
guess.
can channel it properly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. But yeah, I was very well surrounded afterwards as well. This is when I got into John Faveki. This is when I got into philosophy and theology. And I think doing that after having broken open your worldview can make you so much more open to different theories and views of reality that I
How did you
think
find John Vervaeke, by the way? You've mentioned him like 3 or 4 times, and to be honest, I'm taking it as a sign I need to now
I
listen
think you
and
would
read
love to
him.
speak
So,
to him. I think you would make for a great
Well, I need to first study him. So maybe you
Yeah.
can recommend where I should start,
Yeah, I
or
will
well, let's
recommend
hear
anyone
your
listening
yeah.
his YouTube series, which is extremely popular. It's called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, in which he basically
Awakening from
the meaning crisis.
the meaning crisis. Okay.
Yeah, so the
Taking
meaning
notes.
meaning crisis is something he's really popularized as a concept that we are currently in this day and age suffering from a crisis of meaning. And he is a cognitive scientist as well as a philosopher. So I think he's got an MA and a BA in philosophy. I'm pretty sure, and then he had a PhD in cognitive science. At least
Wow.
he's well versed in both of those. And he
Mm-hmm.
does in that series. He runs through basically almost a history of thought, but he connects that to meaning making and to cognitive science and to
Oh,
practical
wow.
things that you can do in
Interesting.
your life. But yeah, he's very influential. He's been very influential on me, and the way I got into touch with him was through my brother, who is more philosophically oriented. So he's always recommended me people to listen to, or music to listen to, or things to think about. And he's always kind of poked holes into my worldview
Mm-hmm.
every step along the way. So that's been very helpful. Um, but yeah, that's when I got into all of that. And then because I was so well surrounded as well, and I had my father to talk to, my father's a theologian. I had my father
Oh,
to
your
talk
father's
to
feeling.
about some
So,
mystic texts.
so you
Some,
came out of this space where you realized there's much more to the world. There's
mhm.
much more to everything, I guess. Your
Yeah,
patterns were kind of, you realized those patterns were patterns, which is a way of like almost opening to what patterns am I going to create. And then
yeah,
you started with these conversations with your family
yeah.
and
And listening,
conversations. Yeah.
yeah, just trying to, yeah, exactly. Listening to other people that are wiser than I am and smarter than I am, and then speaking a lot to people that I loved. And my father was helpful because so he's a theologian, and I went through the New Testament with him as well as through Gnostic, a Christian Gnostic text. And I was just
You
reading
went
that
through
and
both,
crying.
like you both sat together and every day or some or often
We did
and
a weekly discussion of just one chapter of the New Testament. We did that
that's
for a while.
beautiful.
So we
Oh
went
wow.
through that and just trying to help me to understand, because I had so many hangups with the faith that I was brought up in, and
Mm.
I've come much more at peace with it. I'm not a churchgoer at the moment. Maybe I will be, maybe I won't be, because I still have some issues. But I've become much more comfortable with my Christian identity and a lot of Christian ideas through him and through that experience, because it allowed me to see it in a different way. Whereas before I was approaching it as a scientific equation and a book full of forensic facts. Now I think I can see it as an extremely powerful. Um, I think I see the Bible as symbolically extremely powerful and true on some level in many cases. But yeah, he helped me a lot with that. And then I was very positively influenced by a lot of people online. And then I got started on talking as well just a year ago. So now I just like to speak to people as well. Um, but I've gotten a bit away from the ideas and a bit more into the personal. Because I think, like I told you earlier in this conversation, there's only certain lengths to which you can go with talking about this. You can do it very beautifully with trying to hold the paradox and attending to the mystery and using words to refer beyond words, but that doesn't always happen. And I feel like with the personal, there's something really beautiful about individuals where I feel like they're irreducible in some sense if you let them unfold in front of you. So their wholeness. Um, so yeah, that pulls me a lot nowadays as we're almost wrapping up. But yeah,
There's no rush. It's okay. Yeah.
so yeah,
Well, it's almost I mean, we hadn't said the word, but when you were talking about with your dad and these study sessions, but also the way that you started listening, I guess it feels like love to me. It feels
yeah,
like a space of love in terms of letting your parents love you
mm-hmm.
and maybe also accepting that love from not without it needing to be quantifiable or
Yeah,
scientific.
yeah,
And I guess that has to do with the way you feel about yourself, right? To go back to that theme of that way you were being hard on yourself, criticizing yourself, trying to live up to other patterns that don't feel like love to me. Does that make
mm-hmm.
any sense?
Yeah. Love became my biggest goal, and to spread love, um, and it still is, I think, to embody it, and I think it's at the foundation of reality, because I see reality as relational, and I think love is essential in that relationship. So um,
You feel
before
like
we end
that's what
as
you're
well,
doing in your conversations, opening that space somehow, or trying to learn
yeah,
how to sit in that space, or
yeah. The one of the most important things about the podcast that I do, which is very small scale, also for a reason, is that relationality is the most important thing to me in the podcast. So getting to know people and to let them be heard and to hold space for them. So I had a while there where I had some couple of bigger guests on, and then I noticed that that just wasn't very good for me. I started
mm.
to, yeah, I just noticed that I had a kind of a bad response to it, and then I wanted to one up the guests that I had every time
Oh
to get a big. And then I
yeah.
was like, okay, I need to tone down. So then I very consciously was like, okay, I'm just gonna stick to some random people that I think are beautiful to talk to, and that's been really good. Um, and so that's actually a really nice practice in my week, but it's actually something that I try to do offline mostly. Uh, there just happens to be one conversation every week that I record so that I can speak to some people overseas and some people that I'm particularly interested in. But it's been really gratifying and fun to do and meaningful.
It's the way you want to live your life then, and is in conversation in this way or something.
It's
Or
a part of life, and it's a way to make relationships and to strengthen them and to maintain them, to talk. I think conversation is and well, it can be beautiful, and I think communication is really important. And I'm trying to talk to so many different people to somehow transcend the separateness and to come to a reality that's a bit more connected. And I think that's something that is the opposite of what our society sometimes feels like, especially with the digital age and with people feeling that uh, their neighbors are their enemies sometimes.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just from my perspective, to see someone who's so young and who's trying to find a different way to set different patterns, right? Not just going with the inertia of assuming this is good and this is bad and this is cool and this is not, and because just by doing it you start to open up the fact that that can be done, right? That's a
Mhm.
possibility for other people that are around you. And I don't think is it an easy thing to do? Or I mean, something I was wondering about before we talked was like the pressure you might feel from positive things, like that you're, for example, the way you look, right? That people expect you because of the privilege you talked about before, or because of even being like handsome. We once talked about that you were modeling and stuff, and that's a lot of weird pressure.
Yeah.
Um, these things that people don't think of as like pressurized. I wonder if this has helped you deal with some of that too. Because when you were talking about like with the guests, right, where you want to one up, um, there can also be a way in which when you do have success, or when people do see you in this way that the old you would have wanted more of, that
Yeah.
that becomes pressure. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I do. Sometimes it comes back. Like I'm still doing a little bit of modeling, and I had a job recently, and I noticed it as well myself. I was like, oh, this could actually be something. But then I'm like, well, and same with the podcast. There's lower parts of me that then want that, but I think the higher part of me is always more dominant, and I feel more aligned than I used to be. And so right now, to speak more practically, I was asked to go to Italy in September and October, for example, to work.
For a
And
shoot or
instead,
something? Yeah.
well, yeah, to live there for 2 months and to do a lot of castings and to really stay there for a
Oh,
bit.
okay. To actually be in the.
Yeah, and I've done it before, and it was a helpful experience. But also after that, I was like, this is not for me. Um, and so then there's a part of me is like, well, you should really do that. But then in the end, I've decided to walk a different path instead, and I said no to it, and I'm now going to become a school teacher. So that's
Oh,
something I'm.
really?
But
I was
yeah,
gonna ask about, yeah. So
yeah,
yeah. Tell me a little more about that. Before you do too, have you? I mean, there could be a way to that it's not either or for this stuff too, isn't? Is
yeah, yeah. I do
if
a little bit. Like it's okay. It's just it can't
it's the way
be.
you're thinking about it, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah,
Or
it's like how it affects your mind, and if you do it and it turns on your vanity and it turns on your ego, then it's not good. I found it fine to do a job and it was okay. It didn't do much bad with me. But I think if I start to live somewhere for 2 months and do that exclusively, uh, I'm not so sure if that would be good. And especially if I do it instead of doing something like this, where, um, yeah, I think becoming a school teacher for me really aligns with what I'm trying to do in life, just to connect with people and to spread love and I really like to educate and to inspire the younger generation as well. I think that's really one of the highest things I can do with my time at the moment. So when I saw that as an opportunity, I was like, that's probably one of the best things I can do with my life.
Totally, totally. I mean, two things I have to say is it's like what you were saying before, what we were talking about of what you put yourself in, the regularities you surround yourself with, even if you're the most enlightened person, are going to, create the parameters of your life. So if you're surrounded by people who are worried about how they look and trying to look
Yeah.
better than one another, which I know
Yes.
what that world is like, it's just like
Yes.
that. And people
Yeah.
telling you
Yeah.
what's wrong with you all the time or what you should
Hmm.
fix, there's no way you can't help but change the parameters and regularities of your life are going to shift in that direction. I mean, no matter
Exactly.
how enlightened you are. And it's
That's
not
an
that it's a
excellent
bad
point.
thing, but it is a choice, right? You step back enough to know, okay, I'll be making the choice to be setting those parameters in my life.
Hmm.
Or this other one you took, which I have to tell you, just yesterday I had lunch with one of my best friends because I'm in the States right now, and she's a school teacher, and I think she's probably changed people's life more than almost anyone I've met. And also even on the podcast or even in like life having conversations, almost every person, I would say 65 to 70% of people end up saying it was some teacher who gave them some book. I
Yeah.
mean, that changed or opened up, or that some teacher noticed something about them and just spoke it, and it
Yeah.
changed the trajectory of their life. So yeah, you couldn't choose a more important thing to do from my perspective, having.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah.
About when does that start, or what is that like,
Oh
or
yeah.
that feels exciting.
It is. So basically there's a big like shortage in the Netherlands of teachers, probably in
Oh,
other places as well. And so I was just looking to see if there's any full-time jobs that I could just start right now. Uh, and I saw this as it's a job from the start, so you get paid from the start, but it's also an education. So normally you'd have to do a 4-year track to become a school teacher in the Netherlands. But this is a
mm-hmm.
sped up one, so it's done in 2 years. And then the first 6 months are more of a trial period where you're at a school and you're helping, but you're not fully into the education yet. And so yeah, I saw that and I was like, that fits perfectly, and that's starting in 2 weeks. And then next week I have some introduction things, and I
Oh,
still have to prepare to school. But
it makes me almost want to cry because I can just imagine all these kids. It's exactly what we've been talking about in a way, like all these kids having a role model like you, right?
mm,
Just someone, and I don't mean to put more pressure on you because you don't need to be perfect and you don't need to do this for your whole life or something or
mm-hmm,
whatever, but I mean, just someone who knows what you know and has stepped back and isn't in that trap that we all saw when
yeah,
we were kids. I mean, I'm a lot
yeah,
older than you, but I mean, it makes such a huge difference.
yeah,
So I feel emotional to think of you going into that because it feels to me it fits very well with all this. I didn't expect it. It's a surprise, and that's
yeah,
probably part of it too. And
yeah,
also just it feels like you're gonna give so much. Maybe you don't know it even, but just
mm-hmm,
by being there, I can already imagine.
yeah. I hope so.
So
Thank you so
cool,
much for
great
those
for you.
words. It means a lot.
I want to hear last thing. I mean, there's a
Good.
big thing that we haven't talked about much yet, and it is
Mm-hmm.
connected to all this, and that's that you've gotten married.
Yeah.
And so how do you see that relationship and that source of love when it comes to these other things? Has it, because I feel like you and your wife have a lot of conversation, not online. I mean, not
Mm-hmm.
in, but it feels conversational. I mean, how does all that connect to what we've been talking about? Maybe
Yeah, I'll
yes.
tell you. Okay, okay, so I met my wife through yoga class. She teaches yoga, and that was 3 years ago in the
So she
university
has this
gym.
embodied
Yeah,
uh
she
connection.
had, when I met her, she was like, oh, she has got everything that I don't, in a sense. Like she's like, she's gonna complete my puzzle, and that's what happened basically. And I first met her thinking that she would never be interested in me. She's a bit older than me, and I was a first year student, so So we got to build a solid bond first, and we spoke a lot after classes, and I would just ask her questions about yoga and about a bunch of things. We had a lot of meaningful conversations, most of which like I forgot the content, but I remember the connection, and that was always very profound and very powerful. And she kind of, I think, made me like less obsessed with all the books and the podcast because I was just listening the whole day
Good.
and reading the whole day. And yeah, I think that she allowed me to become more embodied. And I see yoga as a wisdom practice, and she teaches it really well. I think having been taught now by more teachers as well, I'm really grateful for that. And yeah, that relationship has been the best relationship in my life, I would say. Um, I think that I was very certain from the start, and she was as well. I wanted to get married right away, actually. She
Aw.
was like, let's wait a bit.
Aw.
And that proved to be a wise decision because now we've
Mm.
had a beautiful wedding with our families. Um, and it's, yeah, it's like I said before in the podcast, it's made me much more complete. Like she would call me out on so many stupid things that I was doing, like things that were just not serving me, things that were a little bit too extreme. Like I would fast the whole day and I would eat one meal because I wanted to be focused and all these things.
Yeah.
Like so that's been an extremely good help in my life. And it's the foundation. Like she's what grounds me, and she's like my favorite person to talk to. And so I'm very privileged to have her. She's just right behind over there somewhere.
Oh,
Um,
that's beautiful.
so yeah, and it fits in with all of this in the sense that I think being in a intimate relationship with one person, in some sense, is yeah, it's in a way it's reflective of reality. You know, this relationality, what we were talking about. Um, I think it's really good to have someone to share life with because life is not monological. I think life is, found in the relationship, in the in between, and in the dialogue. So
Yeah.
it's a pleasure to share that.
Well, I'm so glad you found it. And just having heard you talk about her, it does feel like she sort of turns you back towards the world or
She does.
into your body and
She
into
does. Yeah,
real
yeah.
life and
Yeah, I was
real
floating there for
connection.
a while. She brought me back. Like we always joke about. She has a moon tattooed on her shoulder.
Oh,
She
great.
had that when I met her. That's like representing the feminine, and thus the more spiritual. And she herself is more of that masculine sun type of
Mm,
energy. And
wonderful.
so she got me interested in also getting a tattoo. I only have like three little small ones, but I got a son because I was the opposite. Like
Oh,
I was all the way to the feminine and to the spiritual, and I almost like drifting in that, like disconnected from the world almost. Like I was just checking out and meditating and uh and so yeah, she brought that back to my life to allow me to become more whole, and I hope to do the same with her. So I provide her the other side of the coin.
oh, that's so wonderful. And actually, that's a perfect place to stop talking today
Hmm.
because it's actually where we started, right? This coincidence of opposites or
Yeah.
like the paradox that you hold that becomes the most rich portal, right? The portal
Hmm.
into real living. So
Yeah.
it's wonderful that you found that with two bodies, right?
Yeah.
In the world.
Beyond
So
dichotomy.
exactly, beyond Akai. Well, Lucas, I'm so glad that you and your wife are in the world doing what you're both
Mm,
doing, and let's keep talking. I want to hear how
absolutely.
the school stuff goes. So let's check back in about that later someday.
Likewise. Thank you so much for your time. It's always good to speak to you. We'll speak
All
again.
right.
Thank you.
Thanks.